I'm Stephen Hicks. My guest this evening is Professor Jerry Kirkpatrick from California State Polytechnic University in Pomona. He's the author of a new book on Montessori, Dewey, and capitalism. And he tonight gave a lecture to the philosophy of education class here at Rockford College, sponsored by the Center for Ethics and Entrepreneurship, on the themes of Montessori, Dewey, and capitalism. Professor Kirkpatrick, both Montessori and Dewey are known properly as modern and very progressive educators, and two of the giant names in philosophy of education and education practice in the 20th century. What distinguishes them from the long line of traditional educational thinkers and practice over the course of 2 millennia plus?
Right. They focus on concentrating on the child, the whole child, not just communicating a lot of information. They focus on trying to develop the child's independence, ability to think for himself or herself, and have a good self-directed kind of life. Montessori uses the term concentrated attention, where she it's her primary aim in education to get the child to concentrate for long periods of time, something that will increase as the years go by to adulthood, which presumably would be then a nice productive career with strong concentration. John Dewey talks about undivided interest in the sense that, first of all, we should have interest in what we are studying and be able to choose what we are learning, as opposed to the traditional education that's been taught since at least ancient Greece, where basically you are just information is drilled into you, then you must recite it back, and if you make a mistake, you might actually get hit or spanked or whatever. It's the modern progressive view of basically being nice to the child and understanding their emotions, their desires, and letting them pursue their own interests.
I see. Well, you do note that Montessori and Dewey both are drawing on some historical figures in the tradition, not necessarily the dominant figures up until the modern time. Who would you single out as the major figures that both Montessori and Dewey are drawing upon?
Well, there are quite a few since about a century before the Enlightenment, but it even goes back to the Roman educator Quintilian in the 1st century A.D. Was very concerned about his students and not having this harsh kind of discipline. He wrote a book. It was lost in the Middle Ages and then rediscovered in the Renaissance, which then influenced a number of other people. And we've got the Czech reformer Comenius. We have John Locke. We have Rousseau, who's called the father of modern education because he focused on the concept of interest. The child should be able to pursue his or her own interests and not just be forced into a situation like the traditional teacher. There was a Swiss practitioner by the name of Pestalozzi, had a number of schools. Johann Friedrich Herbart, a philosopher at the University of Königsberg and actually successor to Kant, coined the term pedagogy, or science of learning, or science of teaching. There was then also Friedrich Froebel, father of the kindergarten. And kindergarten means garden for children, and as opposed to a very unfriendly kind of classroom type situation. And his term kindergarten was supposed to apply all the way through education, not just the pre-first grade that we think of today.
Right, as you put it in class, a garden rather than a prison.
Yes, right.
The right place for class.
There is a definite tradition, and so I see Montessori and Dewey as the culmination of this whole trend.
Okay. Focus on a couple of the more particular elements of parallel. For Montessori, the phrase is concentrated attention. For Dewey, it's undivided. I don't remember the
interest.
Undivided interest. Okay,
yeah.
good.
Yeah.
And both of them independently are focusing on this as a central part of education.
Right.
And in your judgment, it amounts to the same thing with different labels.
Yeah, very similar, because with Montessori, you want the child to learn how to concentrate for long periods of time. She developed these unique and very clever, she calls them didactic materials, that the child works with. And if you can encourage the concentration, it relaxes them. many problems just kind of fade away. Dewey is talking about the traditional classroom where the child is bored, starts daydreaming. The interest, in other words, is divided, and it breeds dependence. And it becomes very discouraging to the child.
And so for both the primary job of the teacher is to set the right conditions for the child to get into the state of undivided attention. Right. Okay.
Right. Montessori calls it a prepared environment, and Dewey just says the teacher needs to develop certain experiences that will encourage this.
And then the educational outcome, the primary one, is that then the student cultivates independent judgment. And so in both cases, the teacher is a facilitator of the environment, so the student concentrates and then achieves the ability.
Now, I think I'm extending this a bit to talk about it as independent judgment. Montessori calls it independence, and Dewey calls it, they don't really define it as specifically as I do. Because I think most people think of independence as you become an adult and you can pay your bills, and pretty much like that, have good sound judgment. But independent judgment is going beyond that to, like the boy in the story of the Emperor's New Clothes. When everyone else is sitting idly by and ignoring it or denying it, the boy pipes up and says the Emperor has no clothes on. He sees it, he judges it, and he also acts on it. I would say other parallels are the ability and willingness of revolutionary Americans to go dump tea in Boston Harbor, having the guts to really do something that's not necessarily popular.
So the independence has both a cognitive component and an existential action component. You're stressing similarities between Montessori and Dewey, but through most of the 20th century, the perception has been that they're right, that they're philosophically different, they bring great turf warfare issues. In your judgment, do you think that the differences are overstated or are they real?
Well, they definitely are to some extent, because throughout the 20th century, it was progressive educators, not just Dewey, and Dewey was kind of a little bit on the sidelines, for most of his career as a professional philosopher, and it was the people who were speaking for him or in his name. And I don't think they necessarily followed what he was saying precisely. But no, it's still true that Dewey advocated a more social orientation in his schools. He saw education as a tool of social policy and with a very significant political element. Montessori did not. But that's true of most of the European progressives. They did not have the strong political element to them. They focused really down at the class level and helping the child become independent and catering to their interests and individual differences.
Right. And one of the things also you mentioned in your talk, but you develop further in your book, are the political and economic implications of these educational philosophies and your extensions of them. In emphasizing this point of finding one's own interest, being able to independently concentrate and work through various projects, and then developing the independence of spirit, of mind, and of action. Your argument then is that both Montessori and Dewey, whether they were aware of it or not, really were preparing students for a modern, free, entrepreneurial approach to society.
Specifically capitalistic. Yeah, I do a real twist on these things because both Montessori and Dewey were really socialists. Sure. But I take a look at their ideas and the whole trend in the progressive movement, and I saw what seemed like a contradiction to let the child, there's what's called the organic metaphor, let the flower blossom on its own, let it be free to choose and move around the room. Yet the whole thing is going to be imposed by the state, which is a tool of coercion. So it's like, especially with compulsory education, you're forcing children to be free, in other words, which is a contradiction. And I said, well, no, they're both talking about independence and want the children to grow up to be strong, courageous adults. That sounds just fine for capitalism. And so I actually advocate then a free market in education, removing government completely from the whole education process, and have entrepreneurial capitalists providing the schools.
So the argument actually goes in two directions. One is if you take the underlying educational philosophy that both Montessori and Dewey are advocating, that prepares students best not for a more bureaucratic top-down socialist
Right.
society. It prepares them for
Right.
an
That's what
entrepreneurial market society.
That's what I saw when I was reading it. I
Right.
just
But
thought
then,
of it and
then also your argument that is if we want to actually institutionalize the kind of educational approach that Montessori and Dewey are advocating, that is going to be best realized not by state-run bureaucratic
Right.
institutions.
Right.
It'll be best provided by entrepreneurial
Right.
market approaches
right.
to
Entrepreneurship,
education.
yeah.
Okay.
And the both Dewey and Montessori are talking about not interrupting the child. Undivided interest. Don't divide the interest. Montessori says it's very important not to interrupt the child. Don't deflect the attention. Well, I see the connection there also at the political level that what government intrusion in the economy does is precisely that. It deflects attention of the entrepreneur and tries to move him in a direction that's away from what the real business of business is, and that's satisfying customers.
Right, or developing the product.
Developing the product to satisfy the customers.
And deflecting toward rule compliance
Yeah,
and
right.
bureaucracy.
Yeah.
I see, okay. All right, the book is called Montessori, Dewey, and Capitalism by Jerry Kirkpatrick. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.